There is a visceral anger in the country. I knew it in theory and even to an extent in practice. But in the few days this week that I spent in the north of the country, I saw it and felt its breath for the first time in all of its fury. Please do not think this is hyperbole. I've been guilty of hyperbole before, once or twice. I promise you on this, I'm not. I attended the Manchester United-Barcelona game with 65,000 or so other people, overwhelmingly working-class people, in the Northwest this week. I swear to you, as God is my judge, people were queuing up to let me have a piece of their mind about the political class whom they regard overwhelmingly as having betrayed them. Having betrayed them in an inchoate way which has found its crystallization over the Brexit debacle. I don't know if they were all Leave voters. I know in one case they were not. But they were all people who believed that British democracy is being stolen from them, and that they are determined to punish the political class, the establishment, the Westminster bubble. That's why I can say to you, and freely, because I will not be a candidate in those European elections or the local elections on the 2nd of May, which come before them. The political class are in for an horrific wake-up call in the next few weeks. Of that, I have never been more certain of anything than I am of that. I read that the mainstream political parties are anxious about going onto the doorsteps outside of the liberal bubble areas. I commend their anxiety, and I recommend that they do not do so, because the anger whose breath I felt, and I am, I hope, a well-known campaigner against the establishment for Brexit, is as nothing compared to the anger that will be felt by those who are the betrayers in the minds of the public. It's a sorry state of affairs. It's a black hole. It's a political black hole in our country. And it got blacker, darker still when my friend Julian Assange was manhandled and physically carried from the Ecuador embassy in London earlier this week. I'm not going to be maudlin. I'm not going to be overly sentimental. I'm just going to say this to you, that the rage I felt at Julian Assange being shanghaied, betrayed for money by the Republic of Ecuador, which gave up their own citizen, which cancelled the political asylum that they had freely given, which allowed the British police into their embassy. The rage I feel against the glee with which the prosecuting authorities seized and peremptorily dealt with Julian Assange. The rage I feel about this gentle man now being banged up with terrorist prisoners in the maximum security prison at Belmarsh, where I shall be protesting this weekend, along, I think, with many others. The rage I feel about the affront, the abuse to the human right to know, the human right to speak and publish freely that which is true, is as nothing to the rage I feel against Britain's liberals, small L liberals, small p progressives. You know, the Guardianista types, the Green types, small g, the leftist types, small l, those that would die for the right of a transgender person to go into any lavatory that they would like, those that would go to the wall against any misgendering, misidentification, any other aspect of identitarian politics, those type of people who were popping champagne corks, who were setting off metaphorical fireworks, who were dancing on the grave of Julian Assange this week, deserve the bottomless contempt of all right-thinking people. The people that wrote humour hit pieces about the length of Julian's beard or the unkemptness of his hair after 7 years living in a room in the Ecuadorian embassy. The people and publications that queued up to publish the revelations of Wikileaks, but who now urinate, micturate upon the man who gave them the stories. The people who invent reasons for their lining up with the US justice system to bang up a truth teller for decades. I just looked at a front page in the studio this evening. Assange faces decades in prison in the United States. They're laughing about it. They're dancing about it. Decades in prison for telling the truth, for receiving information like any publisher does, like talk radio would do, and publishing it, broadcasting it, decades in prison, and none of them even see the contradiction. That the profession they are in is supposed to be about publishing true information. Assange faces one charge, an indictment with one count in the United States. And what's that one count? That he conspired with Chelsea Manning to hide her identity so that she might freely communicate the truth about what the United States was doing in Iraq. That's his crime. And you want to dance that he's going to the United States to face trial on that crime? What kind of person are you? What kind of journalist are you? What kind of publisher are you? Broadcaster are you? Don't you understand that one day that might be you? That you might publish a story that people in power don't like, that embarrasses people in power, and that the police might carry you out of your room. They might put you in Belmarsh. They might send you to Donald Trump and John Bolton and Elliot Abrams and the gangsters on the Potomac. Don't you understand that the entire purpose of journalism is receiving information and publishing it? If it's true, of course. If it's true. Well, was it true? Wikileaks is the only publishing outfit on earth that has never had to retract a single story that they have published. They have a 100% record of truth-telling. Everything they said turned out to be true, and no one even disputes that. It's not disputed that what was in Hillary Clinton's emails was true. No one disputes it. It's not disputed that an American helicopter gunned down journalists and members of the public in Iraq. No one says that never happened. They just say you shouldn't know about it, and you wouldn't know about it if Chelsea Manning had not sent the video to Julian Assange, who sent it to you. How is this different from a state-owned media? How is this different from North Korean media? If journalists, honest publishers, may not accept in fear of decades in American prisons, convey that information to you. And talking about black holes, what about that black hole? You know, the one that's 3 million times the size of Earth, and which was photographed, filmed for the first time this year. We'll be talking to Jane Green, Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, about a story that literally dwarfs all others. Because what is a black hole? It's a door. A door to where? A door to what? 0344 499 1000. 0344 499 1000. You call us, we'll call you back. Well, we may not need thought control, but we sure have got it. I'm talking about Julian Assange in the first hour. For full disclosure, Julian Assange is a friend of mine. I support his cause with every fibre of my being, and I hope to persuade the listeners that it's their cause also. But WikiLeaks goes on, whether Julian is in the maximum security Belmarsh prison or not, and Kristen Hrafsson is the editor of WikiLeaks, and he joins me now. Kristen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start with the issue of veracity. I said in my monologue at the beginning that WikiLeaks is the only publishing house in the world that has never had to retract a single story that they have published. That's true, isn't it?
That is true. Since the foundation of WikiLeaks in 2006, there has not been a single document among the billions and billions of documents that we have published and stories that have been proven unauthentic. That is quite a decent track record, and I must say that I've never worked with a media organization that has such an impressive track record in that respect.
So if there's no question that what WikiLeaks published was true or not, it was clearly true. Nothing ever has had to be retracted. Then where is the crime in this? I could see that there could be a crime in accessing people's information, and people have been punished for that where they're not protected by whistleblowing legislation. But the publisher of material that is provided by other people cannot be a crime. If it was a crime, The Guardian, the New York Times, and all these other publications that published WikiLeaks' material would be themselves on trial.
That's absolutely correct, George. That is the essence of our story here. There is no difference between the activities of WikiLeaks and the media partners that we partnered with in publishing the information that are highly disputed, the disclosure of war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, the collateral murder videos showing the slaughtering of innocent civilians, etc., etc. If we are in the docks because of these publishing activities and Julian Assange, then quite many publishers and editors, Russ Pritchard of The Guardian, and others at the New York Times and Der Spiegel, El País, Le Monde, and the couple of hundred other media organizations that we partnered with in that project of 2010 and 11, which seems to be the reference which is used to try to get Julian Assange extradited to the United States.
I mean, on this basis, the Washington Post was guilty during Watergate of publishing material which came from deep throat, official state information that they had no right to impart to a journalist.
Yeah, this is absolutely a disgraceful way of twisting things around. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that we did the right thing. We have a duty towards the general public in publishing information from sources or whistleblowers who come up on things that they deem should be in the public domain. It goes through a very strong, stringent editorial evaluation. And it's very straightforward and simple. A, is it authentic? Is it truthful? B, should it be in the public domain? And if it is, you publish it. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yes.
That pertains to the material of 2010 and 2011, the Iraq warlocks and the Afghanistan warlocks and the collateral media and the diplomatic cables. That also pertain to the information leading up to the election in 2016 in the United States, which has angered a lot of liberals in that continent.
Of course, he's not charged with any of that, and this is important, I think, for everyone to know. The indictment has one count. The U.S. indictment has one count, namely that he conspired with Chelsea Manning, a hero amongst liberals, partly because she changed gender, changed sex, and therefore overnight became a hero amongst these liberals. But Chelsea Manning courageously faced potential of decades in prison for leaking information to Wikileaks. And the only charge that Assange is facing is that he conspired with her to protect her identity in conveying that information. The information which included video footage of a US military helicopter killing journalists and members of the public down below and laughing about it on air.
Exactly, that's true, George. And before we published the Apache helicopter attack video on April 5th of 2010, I traveled with my producer down to Baghdad to a impoverished region in the southeast of Baghdad to meet actually the children who were wounded and lost their father, Matasar Tomal, in that horrendous attack. I still remember the sorrow in their faces, and I can tell you as a father of myself that this was the only justice they got, the justice of having the truth out, the justice of how their father was killed by a helicopter crew almost a kilometer up in the air with total advantage, killing their father who came up on the scene trying to help a severely wounded Reuters journalist called Said Shma. It's disgusting.
How then?
That Julian Assange is committed is publishing this information.
Yes, exactly. Now, Chelsea Manning may have committed a crime by conveying that information to a publisher, but no more than any publisher that ever publishes information. The most famous example here would be the theft of discs from the Houses of Parliament, which revealed widespread, massive corruption and malfeasance on the part of British parliamentarians in regard to their parliamentary expenses. The Daily Telegraph published this information, and the reverberations lasted for many years. It's exactly the same, isn't it? The theft of the disc is a crime, but the publication of information in the public interest, which emerges from a crime, cannot be a crime, or journalism is dead.
You're exactly right, George, and it's absolutely laughable to read through the indictment, which entails of descriptions which actually have been available online for years now, of very natural and normal relations between a journalist and a source. Can you just fathom that they put in quotes the quote, "Curious eyes never run dry," unquote. That on that basis they're going to put a man behind bars for years in journalism.
Yeah.
I urge every journalist to read through this indictment. I urge every journalist, a serious journalist that have been working in the field, working with whistleblowers, working with sources, to read through this.
Julian looked, I mean, I know him well. I visited him many times. I've sang to him through his window on many occasions when I haven't been able now to get into the embassy for a long time. When I saw him carried out, manhandled out, it broke my heart. The pictures will never leave my eyes. What do you make of his psychological status now that he's in Belmarsh with some of the world's most dangerous terrorist prisoners? What is he feeling tonight?
Well, you and I know Julian Assange. He is quite an extraordinary character. The battle is not just now beginning, and now we have everything out of the shadows. We know exactly what we are dealing with, and he knows what he is dealing with. The fight has just begun, and it's going to be fierce, but it's going to be fought on every front. And you should never underestimate the ability of Julian Assange to enter into a fight and get the best of his opponent. And that is my hope, and his friends and our team. Of course, we will fight this and with every possible means. It simply cannot happen, and people have to wake up to the fact that this is such a disgraceful event. This event at the embassy, which was staged and obviously carried out in such a manner, in such a disgraceful manner, that it should leave an image people, unfortunately, people are making fun of in some circles. But what a disgrace. Of course, this will be fought, and it's a battle that we intend to win. And I'm sure Julian will be ready for that fight.
And the website, the WikiLeaks, is still functioning, still providing a valuable service to the public. How do people see WikiLeaks?
People can see WikiLeaks on the website. We have continued to publish, despite the fact that on weeks on end last year, Julian was not available. His internet was cut off. There was phone scramblers put up in the embassy. There's a dedicated team to continue the work. Of course, we want his input, and I hope we get that soon, full time. But this is a fundamental fight now going on the freedom of the press, and that is what every individual member of the public should focus on, and not be distracted by propaganda side issues, whether it comes from Ecuador, whether it comes from Washington, or in fact from politicians here in the United Kingdom.
Kristinn Hrafnsson, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Kristinn Hrafnsson, who is the current editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. X-Ray Vision says the mainstream media is no longer fit for purpose. WikiLeaks puts them all to shame. Now they can all go back to sitting on their backsides, telling us what to think and who we should attack, all the while calling it news. And Steve in Chelsea says, I tell you one thing about this black hole that's millions of times bigger than the Earth. Theresa May still couldn't hit it with a banjo. Steve on the Isle of Mull. And George, Julian Assange political bias showed during the US elections, clearing the way for Trump. Getting involved like that deserved him being a target. And you can't cry foul after playing so dirty. The man is bereft of ethics. That's from Ahmed. Well, let me tell you that the WikiLeaks published 21,000 documents about Donald Trump. 21,000 documents about Donald Trump. So that is actually just factually untrue. If you're saying to me that if somebody leaks to me documents which show Hillary Clinton to be as crooked as a 9-bob note, I shouldn't publish them. I'm sorry, not with you there, brother Ahmed. And anyway, this is a point that's just been pointed out to me by my inspiration through the glass. Julian Assange was banged up in the Ecuador embassy when the Clinton emails were published. And so it's nothing whatsoever to do with him. Put that in your pipe, Ahmed, and smoke it. Ray from Islington says, Donald Trump praised Wikileaks from the depth of his soul against Hillary. It's on tape. Now he says he has no interest in Wikileaks. Julian, a lamb to the slaughter. That's from Ray in Islington. X-ray vision. I've felt weird since yesterday. Seeing Julian Assange dragged out of the Ecuador embassy live on TV was disturbing and very saddening to watch. Hearts had a sinking feeling ever since. Well, I certainly know how you feel. Liam Ryan says, great opening statement. I was appalled by the gloating of a blogger who habitually calls Julian Assange cupboard boy. The irony was that the same centrist blogger was begging for support for press freedom when he was doorstepped by Tommy Robinson. Ah, Liam. Hypocrisy, thy name is journalist. X-ray vision again. Surely there are only allegations of collusion between Assange and Manning. Why couldn't they have just produced the evidence for him to prepare a defence? Well, a very good point, and one which I am expertly able to guide you, but right after this. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. We call you back, and therefore it needn't cost you more than a penny or two. You can tweet me at Talk Radio at George Galloway. You can email me via the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text me. Text the word talk followed by your message to 87222. But remember, that will cost you 25 pence plus normal sending charges. In this first hour, we've been talking about Julian Assange. In the second and third hours, we're talking about everything else that I mentioned in the monologue at the beginning. Here's an SMS from one of our visiting professors, Samson in Kilmarnock, definitely the cleverest man in Kilmarnock and way beyond. He says, both the Brexit betrayal and the arrest of Assange elucidate the horrible truth about our liberal democracy. We have the right to vote. We have the right to free speech. But should either of those rights threaten the hegemony of the establishment, they are quickly disposed of. Rights cannot be rights at all if they do not apply when we most need them. Samson, that is the best expressed SMS I've ever read, even from you. Nick Steele says, the land of the free and her lapdog allies don't like the fact that Wikileaks had shown the whole world the Americans spreading their freedom by the machine gun. Assange had the bravery to be the front man, exposing the criminals. Good luck to him. Thank you for that, Nick. Fra says, Assange, Snowden and Manning tried to awaken the conscience of the world against the wrongdoings of our so-called democratic governments. Shame on us for allowing their humanity to be buried under a judicious onslaught, their fate sealed in solitary confinement. You're making me cry, Fra. Let me hear from Darren in Leeds. Go ahead, Darren.
Hi, Mr. Galloway.
Hi.
I just want to say it's a disgrace what's happening to Assange. And even if people don't agree with, maybe things what he's released, it was true what he released about the war crimes being committed and about the DNC rigging the 2016 election. But I do want to say I'm proud of Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott, which she surprised me today when she came out calling a spade, that it isn't about, arresting him because he hacked. He didn't hack. He's a journalist, and he releases stuff what he's been given by sources. But
he tries to protect those sources, Darren, as any decent journalist does.
Yep. I'm also proud of Tulsi Gabbard and an Alaskan senator called Mike Gravel in the US, who so far the only two presidential candidates who have come out to defend Assange.
Yeah.
Sadly, the front runner, who Progressive Hope, Bernie, has been crickets. And I hope somebody like Corbyn and the other people around the world who share some of Sanders' ideas, push him, because otherwise, if he doesn't come out for this, then what's the point of him being president, saying that he's challenging the establishment? But the establishment are making a move now, and he's quiet about it.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott particularly were noble and brave and exactly what I have known for decades them to be. Nigel Farage also, he's actually been in to visit Julian in the Ecuador embassy. But for the rest of the political class, Theresa May has not had a cheer in Parliament for about the last 3 years. But she did get a cheer this week from the Tories when she announced that Julian had been shanghaied. And by the way, we've wasted £20 million of London taxpayers' money on the charade around the Ecuador embassy. I thought that Tulsi Gabbard's statement didn't just defend Julian, it went to the heart of the matter, the question of empire. If you're going to go around the world invading and occupying other people's countries, any decent person is going to try and tell you about it, is going to try and convey the truth about what happened to you, and they're going to find any means by which they can do so. And that's what Tulsi Gabbard did in her statement today, her video today. I must say, the United States, of course, will not get her as the president of their republic. But if they did, they ought to be proud of that young woman. Thanks for that call. Ryan in Eastbourne is up next. Go ahead, Ryan.
Hello, George.
Hi.
I'm quite young, only 18, and I'm considering, after graduating university, a career in journalism. And I have to say, seeing what happened to Mr. Assange makes me angry and also makes me scared to get into the career. Because if the establishment is fighting that hard against people who did nothing but tell the truth, it honestly frightens me.
Well, I can't tell you how sad that makes me feel, Ryan, but the rational part of me has to concede that you've got a point, except that to accept this is to go quietly into the good night. It's to say that we are not free. We are not a free people. And moreover, that we're not even going to try to be. So the emotional part of me requires me to say to you that if people like you, with noble feelings of wanting to report, to convey information, to make argument to people, is still dischilled by what's happened to Julian Assange this week, then the bad people have won. The bad people have triumphed. And we might as well all pack up and go home. That democracy is dead. It's on life support. It's in danger. But it's not yet dead, Ryan. So my advice to you would be to be a journalist and be the best journalist that you can be. Never lie to people. Never cease to seek and convey the truth. Here's John in East Lancs. Go ahead, John.
Hi, George.
Hi there.
Yeah, I've got quite a lot to say about this issue, but I'll try and keep it the bare minimum.
Okay.
I mean, what got me the other day was I was looking at Jeremy Hunt's Facebook page, and he'd recently gone to Canada, I believe, or discussing something with Canada about the freedom of the press and how essential it was.
Yes.
I thought, talk about parallel universe, that's quite amazing, really.
It is. And he also said, John, that no one is above the law. No one, that is, except him. He forgot that he owned 7 luxury flats and didn't register them with the House of Commons authority as the law requires. So nobody's above the law except Jeremy Hunt, says Jeremy Hunt. Nobody's above the law except Tony Blair, except George W. Bush, except Theresa May, David Cameron, Donald Trump. They're all above the law. The people behind bars are the people that told the truth about war crimes. The people that committed the war crimes are never off your television set and coining it every day.
Well, yeah, selling arms to Saudi Arabia that causes death to children in Yemen.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing, really. There was something also that, going back to the Nuremberg trials, Justin Robert Jackson, he's got a quote here. It is not the function of the government to keep the citizen from falling into error. It is the function of the citizen to keep the governments from falling into error.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have an informed public, then you don't have a democracy. If, for example, Chelsea Manning had never existed and Wikileaks had never existed, then we would not know the truth about the Iraq war. We would only know what was reported from the embedded journalists travelling in uniform with the armed forces and sworn to secrecy, literally so, about many of the things that they saw. It's only because Chelsea Manning was so brave that she was prepared to risk her entire future, a young woman, and her entire future, that she could not in conscience allow that information to remain secret. Now, such people should be lauded and awarded and treasured by any democratic society. And this is my overarching point, John. This is where, in my opinion, it's only mine, yours is equally valid and valuable, but my own opinion is that these two events, Brexit and its betrayal, and the betrayal of freedom of speech, together coalesce. They come together because they are both a negation of anything that you could call a democracy. Last word to you, John.
I perfectly agree with you. I mean, it's this whole saga surrounding Brexit, and it's a case of look over there while we dismantle the NHS, while we do this, while there's homeless people on the street.
Yeah. We're in trouble, John. We're in trouble, and the political class that are in power don't seem even remotely capable of getting to grips with it. Thanks for your call. A very heartfelt one. I appreciate it. Jem says, a dark time for free press and democracy. They're making an example of Assange. It's the very same power that he exposed that haven't stopped bullying him. Very well put, Jem. I thought I put it quite well on Twitter on the day of Julian Assange's arrest. I said, the criminals have made it illegal to publish proof of their crimes. In one line, I think that says it. David Leviscont says, I was very surprised to see Tucker Carlson on Fox News coming to the defence of Julian Assange. When it becomes a crime to report a crime, we are in trouble. This is the deep state. See, that's an even better sentence than mine, David. When it becomes a crime to report a crime, we are in trouble. Trouble we are indeed. The Communicationalist says the Brexit Party single-issue campaign is now a vehicle for Leave voters to make the Euro election a people's vote on the EU again at no political cost. Pro-Brexit MEPs in Strasbourg stand on a planned obsolescence ticket. No reason Leavers won't vote for them. And X-Ray Vision says I'm sure there must be more, but the only MPs I've seen defend Julian Assange is Diane Abbott, Richard Burgon and Jeremy Corbyn. Well, that may be true, I'm not sure. But if 3 MPs were going to defend me, I'd prefer that they were Diane Abbott, Richard Burgon and Jeremy Corbyn. Richard Burgon, a future leader of the Labour Party, if you ask me. And X-Ray Vision adds, in the US, Tulsi Gabbard is being attacked by imperialist politicians and the corporate media. Except Tucker Carlson. Don't forget Tucker Carlson, a right-wing broadcaster on Fox News, was the only one who found the voice to speak up for freedom of expression. Philip B. says allegedly helping someone to crack a password or actually cynically killing 18 civilians and 2 journalists. Maybe the US Department of Justice should be renamed the Department of Injustice. Now, I did say just before the break, I know a thing or two about the extradition treaties between the United States and Britain. I know about them because I was a Labour MP when the Labour Home Secretary, David Blunkett, now Lord Blunkett, during the summer holidays, without parliamentary debate, signed the current extradition treaty between Britain and the United States, which is the most one-sided extradition treaty ever signed by any British government. In fact, no government other than under force majeure would ever sign such an unequal treaty. Here's how it works. No American citizen may be extradited from the United States to Britain. Any British citizen or resident in Britain can be extradited to the United States without even just cause being required to be produced. Merely the request for extradition requires the British courts to sign the extradition order. Now, the Home Secretary and the government can countermand that court decision, and has done in 1 or 2 cases, on cases where it was shown that the person involved was too vulnerable for reasons of health or mental strength to face trial in the United States. But I was involved as a parliamentarian with many cases, not all of them political, some of them criminal, in which not even a scintilla of evidence required to be offered, so that person extradited to the United States. So if you want to thank anyone for our vassalage to the United States, thank that great Labour man, Lord David Blunkett. Let's talk to Catherine Barnard on a wholly different subject. It came up last week, and this is the College of Knowledge. This is the Open University of the Airwaves. What about the Lisbon Treaty? So we thought we'd return to that tonight, and we found a considerable expert on it. She's a professor of EU law and employment law. She's an expert on European labour law, author of the leading text on EU single market law, and provides expert analysis for the UK government's review of competences, focusing on the division of powers in the European internal market. Now, the Lisbon Treaty is the controversial successor to the European Union Constitution. You may recall it was intended to be a constitution, but the problem was, in many member states, that would require a referendum in those states. Some people had a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. Some of them voted the wrong way, but they were made to vote again until they voted the right way. So, what is this Lisbon Treaty, and what's its importance for us now? Nobody better to tell us than the distinguished Professor Catherine Barnard. Professor Catherine, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Please kindly give us not an idiot's guide, but the plain man and woman's guide to the Lisbon Treaty and what it means.
So, yes, you're absolutely right. The precursor to the Lisbon Treaty was the so-called Constitutional Treaty. And the Constitutional Treaty tried to give the EU a formal written constitution. And it tried to do actually some rather sensible things, like try to put in writing what had already been going on, to say things like, these are the areas where the EU can act, and these are the areas where the member states can act, and these are the areas where the member states can act until the EU acts. And that's what most constitutions do. They try and delimit the powers between the centre, to use it in a very loose sense, the sort of federal government, and the states. However, the original version of the treaty also had some rather constitutional paraphernalia in it, a national anthem and a flag and various other things that a lot of people didn't like. They thought it was just going too far, too fast. And so you might remember it was actually the French and the Dutch that had referenda in very close proximity to each other. And in both cases, they both voted against the Constitutional Treaty. And it was thought the Constitutional Treaty was dead, but it sort of miraculously rose from the dead in the form of the Lisbon Treaty, with some of the most obviously constitutional bells and whistles removed from it. Now, in fact, what the Lisbon Treaty does is to amend the original treaties. You might remember the original treaty was called the Treaty of Rome, and that was signed in 1957, and it's been amended a number of times. And the Lisbon Treaty is actually just an amendment of that foundation treaty. But it does do some important things. It did make some important amendments. So it did spell out the powers, who could do what, at what level. But it also made for the first time the Charter of Fundamental Rights legally binding. Now, that charter mustn't be confused with the very similar sounding document called the European Convention on Human Rights. And that document belongs to an entirely separate but confusingly named body called the Council of Europe. So the Charter is the EU version, and it does what it says on the tin. It's a list of rights. It's a list of 52 articles which lay down a number of rights which can be applied by EU citizens against the EU and also against the member states if they're doing EU business. And some of the rights are things that you would expect to see, so right to dignity and right to life. And some of them are more controversial, which the UK didn't like very much, including the right to strike and the right to information consultation.
Well, that last one's a bit more controversial this week than it might have been last. But let's go back to, if you like, the concept. Isn't it the case that the Lisbon Treaty really inked in the intention of the founders and certainly the inheritors of the founders that Europe should be a federal state?
It doesn't actually use that term, and it's sort of, it depends what you. Federal can have a very loaded political concept, or it can be a rather neutral term where if you take it in its more neutral sense, it just says you have a constitution which divides up the powers between the centre, the federal government, the EU and the states. Or you can say, actually, it's a stepping stone to something much more state-like, so turning the EU to something like the United States of Europe. And there was real concern that the precursor treaty, the one that failed, was trying to do that second, of making the EU more like the United States of Europe. But that idea has not really developed that much since the Lisbon Treaty.
Well, you say that, but President Macron and Chancellor Merkel have recently been talking, for example, about one of the attributes of a federal state, namely an army.
That's true, and it may well be that they will go down that path at the moment, but it's not clear whether their own nationals want to go that far. There's already quite a lot of security cooperation that does go on, not in the form of an army, of course, but there is quite a lot of cooperation that goes on between the states. And it may well be that they decide, once the UK leaves, this will be the opportunity to become more federal. But it's not the Lisbon Treaty in and of itself that's driving towards a federal union.
If we leave in October, none of this will matter very much. Beyond any more than it has done up to now. But should we remain? Should we remain for a longer period? What might be the implications for us, Catherine?
Well, if we stay in, well, certainly what I'm about to say will apply up until the end of October, and beyond, were we to ask for a further extension. But if we stay in, we are bound by EU law, as we have been for the last 4 decades or so, which means that if there is a conflict between EU law and UK law, the EU rules will prevail. That's known as the doctrine of supremacy or primacy of EU law. And it also means that individuals can enforce their rights in the local courts, in the courts in the UK, and that's known as the principle of direct effect, and that will carry on applying both under if we stay in and also if we sign up to the withdrawal agreement, that will be subject to those principles as well. But it also means if we stay in, and certainly as we stay in until the end of October, that the four freedoms will continue to apply to us. So free movement of goods, so our goods will be able to move freely. Free movement of people, which is the controversial one, that EU nationals can come and live and work in the UK, but also UK nationals can come and live and work in the EU. Free movement of services, so I can supply services without restriction to other member states and vice versa. And the least controversial, free movement of capital, where I can invest in other countries.
Yes, well, least controversial in some areas, not in my house. But the whole thing is a far cry from a common market. You're far too young to remember, but I recall how viscerally controversial it was in 1973 when we joined a common market. If we had been told in the referendum in 1975 that this common market will, through the Constitution, which was then some bells and whistles were knocked off and became the Lisbon Treaty, that we would have many, maybe most, of the attributes of a federal state and the supremacy of law in countries where we didn't elect the government and we couldn't remove the government. I would never have gotten through, Catherine, I can assure you, as someone that fought that referendum.
I think you're probably right. I think what we would say, I think certainly it was the EU was set up as essentially to deliver on the common market. But even the original version of the treaty back in 1957 wasn't purely about the common market. It already had the footprint of a wider range of policies. So social policy, agricultural policy, of course, very important. They were there from the beginning. And there's a wonderful term which the EU uses, and that's sometimes known as functionalism or spillover. And what that means is that it's all very well to say you want a single market, and single market is good in terms of just it's about free trade. But in fact, if you really want to get the single market to work, you then have to start actually harmonising more and more things. So to give you a simple example, I want to sell my newspapers and my magazines in Ireland and any other English-speaking system. And under my law, I can put, for example, tobacco advertising in my magazines. But if I want to sell them into Ireland, and Ireland says, no, you can't have tobacco advertising in your magazines because we don't like tobacco advertising, therefore I'd have to reprint my magazines. So the EU's response to that problem is, right, we'll have a single rule that says no tobacco advertising in newspapers and magazines, and therefore my newspapers and magazines can start being sold right across the EU. Now, for some people, they would say, well, that's very sensible, make sure that my goods can be sold in other countries. Other people would say, well, that's a terrible thing, because why should the EU be regulating what can or cannot appear in newspapers and magazines? And that's what's called spillover, that something starts as something really quite simple, selling of newspapers and magazines in other countries. But before you know it, in order to make sure it actually happens effectively, you have the EU beginning to legislate in those quite sensitive areas. And then some people say, well, look, that's the EU stepping too far. And other people saying, well, that's just logical, that's spillover. And that's essentially the debate that's raging at the moment. You say in 1975 we would have been fine if we'd known it was just about the common market. But other people say, well, the common market doesn't operate without rules. And often those rules are going to be set by the EU.
Will you miss it when we go, Professor?
Well, I'm non-partisan when I speak about these things. That's a requirement of the programme I'm involved in called UK Changing Europe. I think it's been fascinating to observe, but we will still have a relationship with the EU going forward because they are still our biggest trading partner.
You should go into politics. That was a very political answer. Professor Catherine Barnard, Professor of EU Law and Employment Law, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Tad writes, it's been announced that the great Tommy Smith of Liverpool has died aged 74. I'm very, very sorry to hear that. It's almost impossible to believe. It's impossible to believe he was 74, and difficult to accept that he has passed away, a man of iron. What a player, what a servant to Liverpool, the great Tommy Smith was. I said I was at Manchester United on Wednesday. I was, and I took one of my boys, my middle son, who's Liverpool daft. I took him to Anfield. We went on the Anfield Stadium tour, met very many fine people there, working there, and it was very, very busy, and we were able to see the museum and have a bit of lunch in the boot room. If you're ever visiting Liverpool, and more people are, I really commend that tour of the stadium to you. And just for balance, we nipped across Stanley Park and paid a visit to Goodison and the Everton also. I'm very sorry to hear that, and my condolences to Tommy Smith's family and all Liverpool supporters. Let's hear from Richard in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you very much, George, for taking my call. I came over to Gorton with my girlfriend on Saturday. I thought I'd heard that you were going to be in Gorton, so I rang her up and said, we must go, and I'm going to try and find Mr. Galloway.
No, we were in the dance house in Oxford Road.
Oh,
me and Ken Livingston were in the dance house. It was a great night. Thanks to everyone that came.
Yeah, I'll bet it was. And I thought I might just get 5 minutes on your own, buy you a cup of coffee in the marketplace.
How very kind.
And have a little chat.
How very kind. Well, there we are. Now we're having a little chat. There's just hundreds of thousands of people listening.
I just want to say, George, if you could tell Julian Assange to get his act together, what's your brilliant schooling of the trumped-up charges by the Senate against you and the Yanks?
I know he's watched that many times, Richard. I'm hoping that it won't be necessary and that we can stop this extradition, but I know he's watched that many times. So, you know, Julian's a very good friend of mine, and I love him dearly, and my heart is broken.
I wish him well. But if he's watching that, then my advice is...
Thanks, Richard. That's very, very kind of you. Very kind.
Because you did an absolutely brilliant job in schooling that lot, I'll tell you.
You know, companies have paid me money to come and talk them through the video of that Senate day for their managers, their middle managers, and so on. It's quite difficult because... I'm having to tell them that I didn't make any preparation for it at all. Didn't have any notes at all. Nothing. No preparation, no notes. So that's not really the message the companies want. But it happens to be the truth.
In front of him, and he schooled a lot of them. They didn't know what to say in the end.
As George Bush would put it, Richard, they misunderestimated me.
They certainly did. And I don't think there's many people can misunderestimate you because...
That's very kind.
An orator, and you're a great man, I'll tell you that.
God bless you, Richard. And regards to your girlfriend. Do you want to make another point?
Please, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Mrs. May and what has been happening this week. I just did a quick jotting whilst I was watching a bit of Parliament this week, and I saw that she gave our Chancellor, or the Chancellor came out and said, we've got a 26 billion war chest, which we could use if you get her deal through. Sounds like a bit of blackmail to me. Chris Grayling, 800 million he spent of our money, and now he sent Branson packing regarding the pensions of thousands and thousands of people, which they're arguing about. I don't think that's a very good choice. And he stated at the end of a conversation this week that, it's okay, I won't be standing for PM. Regarding the fact that there's 10 others fighting for the job. And he said he would stay if Theresa wants him. Well, God help us if he gets him.
Well, I mean, if you haven't been sacked by now, if you're Chris Grayling, you're never going to be sacked, are you? I mean, there's obviously something unsackable about you.
Yeah, they must have been at school together, I'm sure of that.
It's like he's on one of these BBC contracts that never ends.
Exactly. They're getting paid fortunes for telling lies. And I don't mean that very rudely to him because I just think he's an idiot, to be honest.
I mean, no wonder we're late for Brexit if he's one of the people piloting it.
Yeah, but I think that Mrs. May now...
Apparently we're not allowed to say he's an idiot, just that he's incompetent. We're allowed to say that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Grayling, you're just incompetent. president. 17.4 million people, right? I think George should go and join, and I've joined the Brexit Party. I know you're going to be a part of that. And I say, if we could do that, we can smash the system as it is today.
Let me just say, Richard, I'm not actually, by midnight tonight, you wouldn't be able to make the point you've just made without me having balance, because the electoral period begins at midnight tonight. I'm not a part of the Brexit Party.
I'm sorry.
But I respect Nigel Farage's decision to break away from UKIP. Of course, I respect and admire the battle that he has fought for Brexit. I'm sure that he's going to do extremely well in those elections. The fact that he's raised more than £750,000 for his war chest in a week is truly phenomenal and shows something's underway. And I'm sure he's going to do extremely well. But I remain an independent. Richard, thank you. God bless you and your girlfriend. Thanks for coming over to see me. Frank is in Dumbarton. Go ahead, Frank.
Hi, George. How you doing?
Good, thanks.
George, I was just wondering, it's about the timing of the Assange thing, right? I was thinking, I was watching some of the media coverage in America concerning it, and already the kind of like MSNBC Democratic side, they're trying to spin the Russian narrative again. So they made the collapse with the Mueller report. They try to throw in Assange in Russia, and I think they'll use that in the election campaign against Trump. You know, with him saying that he liked Wikileaks and stuff like that. You know,
although he's now never heard of them. Trump's never heard of them. What's Wikileaks?
In that narrative.
Yeah. Well, I'm absolutely sure that you're right, Frank, that the Democrats' Fox was shot by the failure of the Mueller report to deliver anything that they could use against Trump. And they had spent the first half of his presidency talking about nothing else. And once that fox was shot, they needed another one. And it seems to me that Julian Assange is being readied as the new fox. Not Fox News, of course. That's the only place where he got any support. But the proverbial fox. So to be a pawn in that particular game is particularly ironic because, of course, the charge of conspiring with Chelsea Manning to publish information that the United States kept secret about the Iraq War. That Iraq War was waged by George W. Bush, and the Democrats, most of them, were only too keen to condemn George Bush's Iraq War, not Hillary. Of course, she voted for it. But many of the Democrats, the Democrat base, was against the war and marching even against the war. Barack Obama being one of them. I was on a march with him, walked down the road with him on such a march. Now they want to proverbially hang Julian Assange for leaking the truth about the Iraq War that they opposed at the time, but now want to hang Assange for revealing the truth about it.
Yeah, and they protest their emails, obviously. That's really what they want to hang on for.
Yeah, although that's nothing to do with Julian, because he was already a prisoner in the Ecuador embassy, and that's why they haven't charged him with that. But the point that you make is correct. That's the real reason for hating Julian Assange. But they can't charge him with that because he never did anything. He wasn't even in a position to do anything. He was inside the embassy when all that happened. And of course, there's no evidence whatsoever that the Democratic Party was hacked, as I've said many times on here. Yeah, as I've said many times on here, Frank, I know it wasn't hacked. I can't say why I know it.
I've heard you say that, George.
I know it wasn't hacked. It was leaked. No.
So they destroyed the servers, didn't they?
Yeah, of course they did. Because by not destroying the servers, they would have left open the possibility that the fact that it wasn't hacked could be proved.
Yeah, exactly.
So what we're going to... journalists, newspapers, television shows, radio shows, are they really content to support the idea that leaked information cannot be published? And if it's published, you go to jail for 50 years?
I read a piece in that paper you used to write for up here before when it was quite decent back then.
The Ranger, the Daily Ranger.
Yeah, the piece they wrote about Assange, it was awful. It was a hit piece.
Yeah.
They were talking about sketching it on the wall, and it was just attack.
Yeah.
The 3 different writers put their name to the piece on it. Honest to God, I hate the paper anyway, George, to be honest. We'll never get it again.
Yeah. Well, neither will I, and I used to work for it. Frank, many
horrible.
thanks. I appreciate
thanks,
your
George.
call. Very good to hear from you again. David says, there's a saying that people stand by. It says the truth will set you free. We must change this to the truth will imprison you. The deeper you think about this, the more it actually makes sense. David goes on, ask the Irish people what the EU did to them regarding the Lisbon Treaty. And Miguel de Souza Perez says, well said, Galloway. I'm sure the 18-year-old wannabe journalist will be tripping on adrenaline tonight with your excellent and well-chosen words of encouragement. Thank you very much indeed for that, Miguel. Roger the Dodger says, Assange is one of the foremost technologists of his era. He could have made billions, but instead he chose to build a system that let ordinary people, ordinary public, see and hear the inner workings of great power for free, the like of which is a first in human history. You're absolutely right, Roger. I really would commend what you've just said to everybody listening here. Julian Assange could have made millions, but he used the talent that he has, which is pure wizardry, electronic wizardry. You've never seen anything like it. He used it for you. For you. Let's hear from Donald, another of our professors up in the Highlands in Inverness. Professor Donald, welcome.
Well, thank you, George. Good to hear from you.
Thank you.
And I was really pleased with what you said at the beginning about Julian Assange. And for the benefit of listeners, as usual, I'm impressed with the information that you're getting across to the public, which is one of the important reasons for listening to Moats.
Thanks.
If I summarise, I mean, you've told us what the actual charge was.
Mm-hmm.
You've told us that Ecuador has betrayed its own citizen.
Mm-hmm.
You've told us that he was imprisoned with some of the most dangerous prisoners in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
You've told us that WikiLeaks has got a 100% record of truth-telling, and I was quite impressed with the understatement. I just two more things. I mean, your listeners are maybe they know this already, but I'm just underscoring the information you've given us. You've mentioned the inconsistency of the mass media, and you've mentioned it cost $20 million on this embassy siege.
Yeah.
Now, all that's really interesting. That's not what I was going to speak about, but that's really interesting information that we're getting by listening to you.
Well, thank you. It's the College of Knowledge. It's the Open University of the Airwaves, and all who contribute, like you, are contributing to that body of knowledge. And in your case, with that beautiful Highland accent. Go on, Donald.
Okay, thanks, George. What I want to say is quite brief, actually, because one of your other professors actually said one of the points I was going to make. But anyway, I want to bring in the Swedish side of things.
Yes.
Because what I've heard, and it's on the media, that after they're dropping the charges against him for sexual assault, now that they've got their hands on him, they're now thinking of resurrecting these charges. And so it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. But for me, the common thread between everything we've had here this evening, between Brexit, the US and Britain, and the European arrest warrants wasn't mentioned, but it's there. The common thread between these stories is our inability to trust politicians and governments. Nothing they say can be trusted to last for longer than a year or two, but that they change everything just for the... obviously when you change government, things change, but you can't even trust what the same people say.
Well, Theresa May said 108 times from the dispatch box that we would leave the European Union on the 29th of March.
Yeah.
And now we're not leaving until the 31st October, and maybe not even then.
And she keeps on saying that only two choices is her deal or no
Brexit.
No Brexit.
It's morphed from my deal or no deal to my deal or no Brexit.
Yeah, but the point is that no deal is not yet off the table. And what I said a while ago, George, is that we took no deal supposedly off the, or should we say, our parliamentarians.
The Parliament
took
did,
off
yes,
the table,
in record quick time, yeah.
But the EU did not take it.
No, of course not.
They have continued to use the threat of no deal to squeeze us even further.
Well, that's absolutely true. No deal cannot be taken off the table.
No.
No matter how many members of the House of Lords sit up all night to rush through Yvette Cooper's noxious piece of legislation, which went through the House of Commons in 4 hours. Imagine an entire law in 4 hours, and one of such moment. And that you, no matter how many pieces of paper you produce from the Augean stable of the British Parliament, changes the fact that the decision on whether there's no deal or not is not ours to make.
Yeah,
it's the European Union's to make.
But yes, I mean they're taking it into their own hands, as we heard from the professor earlier, which is very useful. That was very useful what she was saying.
It was.
But
as to the Swedish point, I did see that headline go across the screen, but the chances of that are vanishingly small for a variety of reasons. First of all, they dropped the charges for a reason.
Right.
And secondly, the women involved, 2 women involved, one of them at least, has publicly stated that she never made any such allegation, and that the Swedish police put those words in her mouth.
I can believe it.
And so, I mean, people can hide behind their liberalism. The reality is this. Did nobody see anything suspicious in the most wanted man by the war machine of the United States should be accused in the way that he was accused? And as I'm an expert on this case, there is nothing about this case that I don't know. I want to make that clear. Julian Assange could have been questioned at any time by the Swedish authorities in the Ecuador embassy, which they have done an uncountable number of times for other people accused of crimes in Sweden. And secondly, they could have agreed at any time not to extradite Julian to the United States if he made himself available in Sweden. Both of these points were made ad nauseum by Julian Assange's lawyers. We're ready to come to Sweden if you'll give us an undertaking that you will not then extradite our client to the United States on these trumped-up national security charges. That's a reasonable demand of any prisoner, isn't it? I'll come and face whatever you want me to face, as long as you don't send me to the electric chair, as long as you don't send me to 99 years in the modern equivalent of Sing Sing. Or I'm ready to be questioned by you in my place of asylum in the Ecuador embassy, which they finally did, and then dropped the charges. So I don't see that going anywhere. The big picture is now, as it's always been, getting their hands on Julian inside the United States, to send him to prison for a long time, to try to bleed him for the names and systems of his contacts and sources of information, so that they can put more Chelsea Mannings in jail. Well, who in their right mind wants to collaborate with that, Donald? What kind of liberal, progressive, Democrat in Britain wants to be a part of that process?
Yeah. I mean, we need a voice like yours, George. You see, I mean, you've even told us about David Blunkett and the extradition, which passed me by at the time.
Passed everybody by. That was meant to, Donald.
Did you say it was during a parliamentary recess?
Yes, in the summer holidays.
Well, there you are. And this has never been challenged properly.
No, it went straight. I challenged it in Parliament at the time, as soon as Parliament came back, because I was involved in several extradition cases, fighting against them under his new treaty. He brought that treaty to the Privy Council and the Queen without it being debated in Parliament. And it is the most one-sided treaty that Britain has ever signed. Just imagine that.
I know, it's just shocking the way you put it. And incidentally, just to talk about, you mentioned about Julian, the whole point of all these charges, of course, is just to neutralise them and take them out of the equation.
Yes.
But can I say, George, just briefly, we don't have time to go on it, but that's happening in Britain with regard to other topics going on with childcare and stuff like that. Just taking people out of the equation by false charges which take ages to clear up.
Put them out of the game.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it's about. Donald, thanks.
It's happening in Britain.
God bless you. Thank you, Donald, in Inverness. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. 0344 499 1000. Or you can text me, as Anthony has. I was berated last night, he says, for standing up for Julian at an establishment gathering. I tried to point out the difference between Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning and Julian. They were American citizens, members of the armed and intelligence services. They had broken the oaths they took and betrayed their country. They are, in my opinion, traitors. Julian is not and has never been part of any military or intelligence organization. He has sworn no allegiance nor broken any oath. He is a publisher who unfortunately showed why we need to keep our governments in check. The way Julian has been treated makes me ashamed to say I'm part of this establishment. Very interesting, Anthony. Thank you for that. John Guess says, is this the last throw of the dice for neoliberalism and US empire building? 1984 was supposed to be a fictional possibility, not a blueprint. And Big Al says, what's the difference what Assange did and reported and what Tommy Robinson reported? It's the same thing, yet we pick and choose, and that is wrong. I'm afraid you're wrong, Big Al, but I can't get into that right at this moment in time. Let me hear from Nicola, who's in Swindon. Go ahead, Nicola.
Good evening to you, George.
Hi.
It was a very, very sad day, I think, for British journalism, seeing him being dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy. I mean, if we saw that happen in another country, it'd be an outrage.
Yep.
But that was happening in our own country. I felt ashamed when I saw that because, you know, he was expressing freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and that could happen to any of us at any time.
Exactly. I mean, it can happen to any truth teller, Nicola, as you're doing now on the air. It could happen to any truth teller like me, presenting work like I do. But it can also happen to, eventually, any consumer of truth. I mean, how long before clicking on a portal to get to Wikileaks and learn what Wikileaks is saying, how long before that is criminalised?
Yeah, or even clicking like on a tweet. If you were to tweet something controversial and I would tweet like it or even retweet it, which I quite often do, am I going to be dragged out of the front door screaming?
Well, exactly, That, of course, happened inside the Labour Party. There are several people listening to this that were expelled from the Labour Party.
Yes.
Expelled for liking and retweeting my work or the Green Party's work, Caroline Lucas's work. Somebody was expelled for saying they effing liked the Foo Fighters.
It's a sad day. I shouldn't have laughed then, but it's a very sad day for freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
As somebody just said there, 1984 was supposed to be a novel, not a manual.
Yeah, and I've heard that there's actually some financial incentive between Ecuador and the US at the moment.
Well, I'll give you the numbers.
Yeah.
They've just received a $4 billion loan from the IMF, and they have just received a $6 billion loan from the Inter-American Bank, which the United States controls, putting the actual price on Julian Assange's head at more than $9 billion. How about that?
Oh, yes.
Even Robin Hood didn't have a price like that on his head.
No, I feel sorry for the poor man because all he did was expose the truth.
Yep, no one can gainsay that.
No lying, no misdemeanor, just stating and exposing
all he did, Nicola, was what the Daily Telegraph did with the MP's expenses scandal. He received goods which somebody who was lawfully bound not to pass them on did pass them on. and he published them because it was in the public interest that we should know. That's exactly what the Daily Telegraph did with the MP's expenses story. Somebody nicked the MP's expenses and gave them, for a consideration, I understand, to the Daily Telegraph. The Daily Telegraph read them and said, OK, this is stolen property, but it's in the public interest that this should be known. As indeed it was. And the Daily Telegraph won awards for doing so.
Yes. But it's still going on, though. They're still renting each other's houses.
Well, that's another matter, but you're right. I saw one MP made £645,000 in profit selling a flat that the taxpayer helped to buy. Nicola, thanks for the call. Here's Keith in Aberdeen. Go ahead, Keith.
Hi, George. How are you doing?
I'm
Lovely
good. Nice to hear
tonight.
from you, sir. Thanks.
I'm phoning up, George, just to give you an insight into the chaos that Brexit is causing for me at the moment.
Tell me.
With regards to me and my wife, we got married last April over in Arizona. She's
I remember.
American.
You were on the show about that. I remember.
Yeah, well, we're now having to head back to America because we haven't had any success in speaking to anyone from the Home Office or anyone helping us any further with things. Basically, the story was that the Home Office is in such a mess at the moment with visa applications that it didn't see half the stuff that we submitted to them, George. So one of the items they didn't see was our wedding photos. So in the actual letter that I got from the Home Office, it actually says, although we noticed that you supplied us with your marriage certificate, most loving couples would at least have pictures of the actual event taking place. Now, we sent them heaps of wedding photos, and that's just one of the many documents that they didn't see. So this is costing us thousands of pounds now. So I've taken to Twitter lately, George, and it has absolutely opened my eyes as to how UK citizens are being treated compared to EU citizens in the UK. Because I'll give you an example. If I was from the European Union, France, Spain, whatever, if I was from somewhere there and I got married to an American citizen, I would then be able to take them over to the UK and settle in the UK.
Not just them, but their mother and father and brother and sister and cousins. You'd have been able to bring them all.
So as a UK citizen, I'm being treated worse in my own country than an EU citizen who wants to come here and settle. I couldn't believe it when I realised that and found that out.
Yeah, well, we've all found it out now, and the best wishes are with you. Apparently, I have to break now. I'll be back.
Thanks very much, George.
All the best, Keith. Thank you. Now, I have, as regular listeners already know, an enormous fascination with space, with astronomy, with space travel, and with black holes, because I want to know, if I can, I know I probably never will, the secrets of the universe, don't you? Because all this must be happening for a reason. None of this can be happening by accident. I'm a religious believer, as most of you already know, but you don't have to be a religious believer to want to know the secrets of the universe. Jane Green is our very own Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, and she very kindly on this Friday night at 9 o'clock has agreed to join us. Jane, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, George.
Very nice to hear from you. The black hole, it's been christened Powehi, is that how you say it?
It's been christened, say that again?
I've got here, it's been christened Powehi.
Has it? What does that mean?
It's a Hawaiian phrase.
Oh,
referring...
they very often use Hawaiian phrases.
No, well, I know very little Hawaiian, but this one refers to an embellished dark source of unending creation. Who knew that was the Hawaiian name for that? Well, leave that aside. Tell us what you felt when you saw the first ever photographed black hole.
Well, pretty stagged actually, George, because it is amazing. We're in a time at the moment where there are so many astronomy firsts, but this one is simply huge, isn't it, on all levels. I've seen so many simulations, but to actually see the real image was affirmation, really, that for so many years we've been looking for one, trying to get an image of it, and now it's been done, it's staggering, and it's fantastic news.
How did we get it?
Well, that's a really good question, because we don't have telescopes or ground-based telescopes on the planet, radio telescopes, that are big enough to just point one of them and spot a black hole. So we actually had a gathering of 8 large radio telescopes, and then used what we call very long baseline interferometry, which means we link those 8 radio telescopes together to effectively have an array of them that is as wide as the planet. In fact, its resolving power is so immense that if you were sitting in a cafe in Cairo, you would be able to resolve the lettering on a 10p coin in London.
Wow.
So they're able to find these tiny, tiny black holes, because obviously they're not tiny in themselves. They are utterly enormous, but they are equally enormous distances away. So even though we have 2 very large radio dishes, we've got the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico and the FAST telescope, of course, in China. Both of those are more than 1,000 feet wide. Those dishes are nowhere near big enough to pick up those very, very faint radio waves. So we've joined 8 of them across the globe to create a planet-wide antenna dish, and that has been able to pick up that black hole that is 55 million light years away.
And the size of 3 million Earths.
That's right. Yep, 3 million Earths wide. It's just stunning, isn't it? Absolutely stunning. It puts politics into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It does. It's cosmic, literally cosmic.
It is.
Now, some of the listeners, maybe many, will be wondering how you can see a black hole at all.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it's very counterintuitive, isn't it? But even an invisible object like a black hole will still cast a shadow. It will create a darkening, and that's caused by the gravitational bending and the capture of light by the event horizon itself, which is the threshold around the black hole, which once you go past that, that's it, you're done for. You're going straight down that hole of the black hole. So that is responsible for bending and capturing the light, and therefore it also creates that shadow, and it's the shadow that we've been looking for. So even though the black hole itself is invisible, it's what it does to the surrounding matter in the disk around it that enables us to see it, to see the shadow.
But there is what we used to call, when it was a lot of money, the $64,000 question. Because when you say it's going down that hole,
yes,
where is it going to?
Oh, it is that $65 billion question, isn't it, really, George? Because
it is.
That we don't know, do we? We have absolutely no idea. Of course, there are many theories. I tend to go with the theory that it's going into another universe, because, of course, there may be more than one universe, what we call the multiverse. In fact,
I have always believed that, Jane.
Yeah. Well, most cosmologists believe that now, George, that there are many, what we call multiple universes, all with their own physics, interconnecting, and we have no idea how many there are. So right now, George, there's going to be a George and a Jane sitting, talking on talk radio in another universe.
And maybe
another universe.
Well, that's my thesis too. That and first of all, I don't believe that such vastness, such greatness, such majesty can possibly all have arisen from nothing, because I believe that nothing can come from nothing. Therefore, I believe in a creator. Therefore, I believe that if there are multiple universes, it may very well be that the same things are happening, but with some small differences, perhaps, maybe big differences.
Yes, absolutely. There could be a tiny difference, or there could be some major differences.
Yes, you could be interviewing me. I could be saying the entire opposite of what I'm saying now. I mean, any number of possibilities, literally unlimited number of possibilities. But the idea that a black hole is a doorway, is a passage, seems to me, given what we know about the physics, unassailable as an idea. It is a passage to something, to somewhere.
Yes. Have you ever seen the film Contact by the great Carl Sagan, George?
Yes, I have, yes.
Yeah. Well, that was based on a very, very sound theories by the renowned Kip Thorne, who's now the Nobel Prize winner.
Yes.
And in there, he puts forward the idea, of course, of wormholes. So where you're actually, whizzing down effectively a black hole through a different dimension into another universe. And often in the past, history is replete, isn't it, with ideas and theories that have been perhaps laughed at the time, but then proved to be true. I think black holes, the idea of a black hole would have been laughed at
yes.
In the early 16, 17, 1800s. But now, look, we actually have the image.
Well, as Shakespeare said in Hamlet, on the ramparts, there are more things on heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy, Horatio. And the bard was unerringly accurate about that. And
yes.
and every century since, the level of knowledge, understanding, theory and practice has multiplied beyond even his imagination. What happens next, Jane? What's the next big thing?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think it's going to be getting to Mars, isn't it? Going back to the moon, and then from the moon we're going to go to Mars. I think the focus at the moment seems to be getting humankind onto a planet, which will be Mars, the nearest one. But at the same time, of course, we've been doing other interesting things as well, getting out to the planet Pluto, so seeing that for the first time, getting to an asteroid in the Kuiper Belt. The Voyager spacecraft are getting beyond the influence of our sun, the star. So, who knows? Who knows? What astounds me, George, is that if we just look back to the 1930s, in the 1930s we believed that our galaxy was the only galaxy, that it was
yes.
the universe. And oh my goodness, look how much we've learned. Look how far we've come since then, and that's less than 100 years.
It is truly extraordinary. And of course, the development of telescopes and the ability to link, as you just described,
yes.
Across the whole world, making the most gigantic telescope ever imagined,
yes.
has been key to this. So man, woman, human intelligence has made this giant key, which might well unlock this universal puzzle.
Yeah, we're going to keep trying, that's for sure. Because
what's the atmosphere in the Astronomical Society? Are people as excited about this as I think they should be?
Oh, gosh, yes. Everyone's very, very excited about it. In fact, everywhere I go at the moment, people are just asking about black holes.
Yeah.
So they're extremely excited because I think if you mention the word astronomy, most people immediately think of a black hole. Certainly when I'm teaching in classrooms in the schools, the children, the first thing they ask is, what's a black hole? Where's a black hole? They all know about black holes, they think. So
How amazing.
This is wonderful for them.
How amazing. Jane, can you stay on the line while I take a caller?
Yes.
Let's hear from Gavin in Bishop Stortford. Go ahead, Gavin.
Oh, good evening, everybody.
What would you like to say to Jane, me, or both?
Both. I've heard of the idea that black holes can also give out either energy or waves, as well as taking them in. I wonder what the expert thought about that.
Jane.
Well,
yeah,
the energy...
Sorry, I didn't catch your name. I do apologise.
That's okay. In terms of energy, which is effectively light, different strengths of light across the electromagnetic spectrum, as we call it, anything that goes past the event horizon, so into that black hole, and is caught by that gravitational grip, the grip is so immense that, of course, the energy of light itself across the spectrum cannot escape. But of course also the gravitational field is so strong that it pulls material towards it, around it, in what we call the accretion disk. So anything that hasn't passed, any matter that hasn't passed that event horizon, so hasn't been sucked down into the black hole, circulates in that accretion disk. That is then spun up by the rotation of the black hole itself and magnetic fields. And if the magnetic fields, which are obviously very turbulent, halt in certain areas, that rotating disk, then that energy is transferred into these jets of plasma, which is highly energized gas. which then fires away at enormous energies from the black hole. But then, of course, when you've got a black hole that's some 55 million light years away from Earth, the light itself, the waves of light, the energy is stretched into the radio wave part of the spectrum. And it's that energy, that light that we are receiving, that we see around the black hole and stretches as it comes towards Earth.
Because it looked like fire, didn't it, around the black hole?
Yes, it looks like a golden ring. Yeah, that's the photons of light, the particles of light that are being generated by that highly energized plasma, the gas.
Gavin?
An ejection of energy and plasma.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's summed that up for me quite nicely.
I think, see, the greatness of Jane is that she can sum it up to thee and me and ordinary people without scientific training, and she brings to life this subject in a way that many dull academics might not be able to do. Jane, there's no question that it's sucking rather than blowing, is there? It's sucking matter in. Is it possible that through a black hole it could go into reverse, if you know what I mean?
Well, yes. No, in the 1970s, Stephen Hawking theorized exactly that it was sucking in material, sucking in positive material and negative material, so matter and antimatter, and that the positive matter would be circulating down into the hole, and the negative would be going into the hole, the positive matter would be ejected, and then eventually there was like a reversal inside the black hole. So suddenly it was releasing all the energy that it contained, all that negative energy back out into the universe. And he theorized that was the start of effectively the Big Bang, the start of another universe. Yeah, so it's sucking negative particles inside, the positive ones remain outside, but then even the negative ones inside reduce the black hole's force till eventually it collapses, rebounds, and creates a Big Bang, a new universe. And of course the Hindus have believed in that for many, many millions of years.
Now, we've satisfactorily established that in another universe, Jane Green and George Galloway are talking on talk radio, which might be called, I don't know, Mars Talk Radio, or the University of the Space Waves. But what I'm more tantalized, if anything, about is how it can be possible that in the universe we are in and that we know of, that only this tiny little planet has life on it. That seems to me, again, an offence against all logic that should be so. What's your thinking currently about Mars?
Well, I think, firstly, George, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the statistics themselves prove that there has to be life elsewhere. And again, it depends on your interpretation of what life is. It may not be carbon-based life, water-based life. There may well have been life on Mars because, of course, a few million years ago, it was much warmer and much wetter. And we've actually only surveyed a very tiny, tiny part of that planet's surface. So who knows? It would be easy to say, well, okay, it's so cold, so obviously there's going to be no life there. But we don't really know, do we? And we won't know until we've really surveyed it on all levels. And of course, they're doing that now. Space agencies are surveying the surface now, so who knows? There may be life well below the surface. They found a lake near the surface not that long ago, so it could well throw up life, but again, maybe life not as we know it. But the statistics alone, George, as you've just said, is absolutely spot on. If you consider that there's over 400 billion stars in our one galaxy alone, latest estimate is that there is over 2 trillion galaxies in the universe and counting, because, of course, we only can count the galaxies whose light has reached us. What about all those galaxies that are exponentially expanding with the expansion of the universe itself, and their light has yet to reach us? So there may be countless trillions more. And if you consider that every single one of those 400 billion stars in our galaxy can have any number of planets circulating around them, so if one of those is in that, what we call the Goldilocks zone, so just the right distance from its star, there may well be all the ingredients for life. So just consider the possibilities there. There may be countless billions of planets out there with life on them.
Just so we don't lose track of the scale of what you've just said, the importance of what you've just said, 2 trillion galaxies in our universe.
Yes.
2 trillion galaxies in our universe and counting.
Yes.
And the possibility of any number of other universes through these black holes.
Yes.
And some fools say there's no God. Let me hear from Jenny in Milton Keynes. Stay on the line, please, Jane. Jenny in Milton Keynes. Jenny, welcome.
Hello, Jane.
Hello, Jenny.
Hello. It's very interesting about these black holes. Now, we're told that the galaxies in the universe are pulling away from each other, and the universe is virtually expanding. Now, could it be that the universe is being pulled by several black holes? Would this explain it?
I would think not. Firstly, yes, the universe is expanding on the small scale. So where we have groups of galaxies, clusters of galaxies, so anything from 100 to maybe 1,000 galaxies, their mutual gravity keeps them together. But on the big scale,
right.
So when you consider, if you can imagine the immensity of the universe itself, yes, that is expanding. But it's not that the galaxies themselves are rushing away from each other. It's that the very fabric of space itself, what we call space-time, is expanding, and it's taking the galaxies with it. So these black holes, mostly, in fact, we think that every galaxy has what we call a supermassive black hole at the center of it. But with the rate of expansion of the universe, so it's expanding exponentially in all directions. And if you consider sort of comparatively in aggregate, these black holes are actually very, very small when compared to the sum of the whole. And they are being inside the galaxies, which of course are all rushing away from each other over truly enormous distances. Does that help?
No, it's just made it more mysterious.
Well, it is, but it's the ultimate mystery. It's the greatest mystery of all, and we must hope that one day in this life or another that we know the answer to all this. Thanks, Jenny, in Milton Keynes. I'm sorry if I was superfluous to that conversation. Jane, finally, the sheer importance of these matters, as you jokingly pointed out at the beginning, it kind of knocks, Brexit or the marginal rate of income tax, or whether or not we should burn this fuel or not, into a cocked hat or into a black hole. This, you mentioned again there, how small the black hole is, even though it's 3 million times bigger than us. Can you give us a plain person's guide to how small we are? How small is the Earth? And therefore, how small is one country on the Earth, one person on the Earth?
Oh, my goodness. Unspeakably small.
Well, it's not even a speck of sand.
No. And it conjures up a memory for me, George, that a few years ago there was a fabulous series on the BBC called The Planet, and they interviewed a lady on there called Carolyn Porco, who was the key imager responsible for some of the fabulous images that were caught during the Voyager missions. Now, the NASA Voyager missions, as I'm sure you know, George, they were those missions that took us 2 spacecraft out to the 4 gas giant planets. And the planets were enormous. They were huge distances away from us, and they took many, many years to get there. And when all these fabulous photographs came back, Carolyn Porco was sharing in this program how she was thumbing through all these amazing pictures, and there was a picture on her lap, and she was idly looking at it, and she brushed off what she thought was just a speck of dust. And it turned out that weeny speck of dust stayed there because, of course, it was, as Carl Sagan said, our tiny pale blue dot, which was less than a speck of dust in a sunbeam, and it was just captured by one of the Voyager cameras as it turned back to face the sun. So it is just unbelievably tiny. If you think of our sun itself as the size of, say, a basketball, then our Earth, in comparison, would be a tiny, tiny top of a pinhead compared to the size of the basketball. And then again, you just have to scale up from that. So the basketball is absolutely, well, tiny, tiny. Just recently I gave a talk and I tried to share with the audience the pictures taken by the Cassini-Huygens spacecraft when it reached Saturn. So there it was, in orbit around Saturn, some 898 million miles away from tiny planet Earth. And there in the background, a tiny speck of blue was our pale blue planet. So it was almost invisible, and yet it was 898 million miles away. It was tiny, tiny. And if you keep scaling away, if you scale out, if we could look down on the size of our galaxy, our spiral galaxy, with its 400 billion suns all circulating around that supermassive black hole at the center. One image that totally shocked me and was the start of my journey into understanding astronomy, or trying to understand it, was a diagram that I once saw, and it was the Milky Way galaxy, and there was this whopping great big red arrow pointing to something in the galaxy, and underneath it simply said, the sun. Only you couldn't see the sun, George, because it was so tiny it was invisible, completely not even there. And our sun is 333,000 times bigger than our planet, but it was but nothing inside that galaxy, inside our Milky Way galaxy. It's just lost. It's so tiny. And if you keep scaling out and out and out, then our galaxies become as small as our sun appears to be inside the galaxy, because they in themselves, although they're enormous, become tiny when you move away from them over countless millions to billions of billions of light years of space. So very, very small.
Jane, you've blown my mind, and I'm sure the listeners too. It's always a delight to talk to you. Come back again soon. Thank you so much. Jane Green, Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. Supermassive black hole. That's what it was. And it puts the other black holes that we've been talking about into some perspective, I always think. Ryan says the most disgusting thing about Assange's abusive arrest was Theresa May's weaponising of the affair, using this as a last-ditch opportunity to look strong and slander the rising opposition to utter gutter politics. Ryan goes on, isn't it curious that Ecuador, having just inked a $4.2 billion deal with the IMF, then moved swiftly to dispose of Julian Assange, and Western countries claim China's use of the Belt and Road scheme in Africa is a type of financial blackmail. Mal says, George, for all the rights and wrongs of what Assange did for the greater good, I think there is another question of our own privacy, in that could this mean that anyone who finds anything out about any individual's doings or correspondence online, their private thoughts or financial dealings, etc., should legally be open to exposure and dissemination? In those regards, then maybe we are all open to other individuals giving all our private information out and viewable online for all to examine. What are your thoughts on this? Well, Mal, the public interest test is the litmus test. It is not, and no one could make the case in a court that it was in the public interest for Mal's private thoughts, private information, financial details, etc., to be made public. But if the Presidency of the United States or the Pentagon is blizzarding other countries and their peoples with rockets and bombs, you could make a very obvious and easy public interest case that that which is being done in the name of a state in using the state's money in pursuit of the policy of the state ought to be known at the very least by the citizens of that state, who are paying for it in more ways than one. That's the difference, Mal. It's the difference the Daily Telegraph made when deciding to publish the stolen data from the fees office in the House of Commons about MPs' expenses. They correctly made the judgment, and no MP would dare go to court to challenge it, that whilst this was undoubtedly stolen goods, the public interest in the material therein unarguably belonged in the public domain. You see my point, Mal? Here's Damien in Bournemouth. Go ahead, Damien.
Hello there.
Hi.
It's on the Julian Assange issue.
Yes.
I left the Labour Party because of the Iraq War, and I went on to join Stop the War and the Respect Party. And I'm one of those people who rejoined the party when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader. And, I'm absolutely chuffed that he's come out in support of Julian Assange. This is the Labour Party that I wanted to rejoin, and I'm glad Diane Abbott has done the same. I do worry, though, that, with the Labour Party being such a broad church, that, sometimes you look at the Labour Party and it doesn't really represent anything, because I wanted to support Julian Assange. I think this is an issue that could really rally the membership again. But obviously we've got the MPs who prefer the old regime. So for me, it could be an opportunity to rally the membership and to make the Labour Party distinctive. But it also shows that the problems the Labour Party have, which is because it is such a broad church, it's always had room for warmongers.
Well, it's a broad church, some of whom don't believe in the religion. And that's the problem. You can have a broad church if you all follow the prayer book and if you all have allegiance to God. But the broad church that Labour developed contained not just atheists but Satanists within it, and indeed leading it, and still in it. Tony Blair is still in the Labour He's still in it, and I'm still out of it. Go figure.
It's still, to me, a very toxic brand. Although I've enjoyed campaigning for Jeremy Corbyn and I've enjoyed working with fellow members, obviously we've had to battle the last 2 years against the MPs, and I don't really see things getting better quickly. It's all taken a long time anyway. Things were looking really hopeful at one point. But, perhaps this is the issue where people will be showing their true colours, because as far as I'm concerned, if you're a Labour Party member, you should be on the side of the people, and that means being on the side of Julian Assange. It should be being on the side of good journalists as opposed to shills.
Axiomatic. But the statement that Jeremy Corbyn made was quite sparse. It was very good. I'm very glad that he did it. The statement that Diane Abbott made and the argumentation around her statement was totally outstanding. I could not fault a single word of what she said, and all I can do is bow before the courage and clarity that she showed. Diane Abbott gets a lot of stick from a lot of people, some of whom who should know better. But on this subject, she was absolutely perfect.
I agree.
Damien, thanks for the call in Bournemouth in Dorset. I was waiting to hear the voice of the legend that is Damien in Brighton. I thought he'd just moved further up the coast, but not to be. Let's hear a wonderful tweet from the cleverest man in England, Adam Gary, my friend on the History Boys. You can go to my YouTube channel, George Galloway Official, where you'll find a cornucopia of knowledge. That is Adam Gary. He says of Professor Barnard, because her inflection betrayed her neutrality, I was prepared to disagree with your guest, but she clearly respected the other side and was a good sport. Your comment to her at the end was brilliant. She was more politician than the politicians. Absolutely correct. Let's hear from Martin in Farnham. Go ahead, Martin.
Hi, George. Just wanted to ask you why you feel that Julian Assange is a hero. for exposing America's military dirty secrets, but someone like Tommy Robinson's a villain for exposing our dirty secrets regarding so-called Asian grooming gangs. And we all know that the perpetrators aren't Japanese. So why the double standard?
There's no double standard. The first secret that he hasn't unmasked is that his name's not Tommy Robinson.
Stephen Yaxley
Lennon, yeah, but you called him Tommy Robinson, and he calls himself Tommy Robinson, but he's not actually Tommy Robinson. So I start off from the premise that he's a man not to be trusted. But what Tommy Robinson was sent to prison for was prejudicing the trial, potentially causing the exculpation of child molesters who were on trial by wrecking the very well and ancient right of the courts to have rules about what can be reported in trials and when it can be reported. This for the defence of the justice system, not to cover up malfeasance by people who are on trial for it. By definition, if there was a trial going on, the state was already onto the malfeasance that is referred to. And what Robinson did was risk guilty men going free because of his reckless populism. And I've got no hesitation in saying to you, if Tommy Robinson wants to reveal a secret that is in the public interest to reveal, I'll support him. But if he's actually doing things which will cause badness and wickedness to get off with it, well, I'm against him, and I think the court did the right thing. And for you to compare that jumped-up wee naff with Julian Assange, it's really a bit hard to bear. Let's hear from Eddie in London. Go ahead, Eddie.
How
First time caller. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, first time caller. I've got a joke for you.
Okay, hope it's clean.
It's a clean one.
Okay, go ahead.
I've got a joke for you. So what is Yanis Varoufakis doing with DM25? He's driving around it on his motorbike.
Okay,
so
got you.
I wanted to talk to you about Brexit, George.
Go ahead, brother.
I think we're in a situation where for years all the political parties have taken the votes of working class people in this country for granted.
Yeah, totally right. Yeah.
And I think they're in for a thorough shock if they think this Parliament, who is absolutely determined to overturn the democratic will of the people in voting to leave the European Union, we've got a bunch of people up there who are pretending to negotiate a Brexit and blaming each other for the reasons they can't get out of it. But we know full well, if the ruling class in this country wanted us out of the European Union, we'd have been gone a long time ago.
Yeah, sure. That's why the Brexit decision can correctly be interpreted as a peasant's revolt. It was the mass of the working class and the poor in the abandoned places in England and Wales in particular, rising up against the experts and rulers who have lauded it, frankly, for the 40 odd years that we've been in the European Union, whilst being mere spectators to the industrial and urban dereliction that it was leaving behind. So I've got no doubt about that. I've got no doubt that I was on the right side in the Brexit argument, and I agree with you entirely that those who imagined that this was just another political issue that could be finessed, that could be twisted, turned, and that people might forget about it, that it could be blunted, are about to be on the receiving end of a whirlwind. There's going to be a whirlwind in this country over the next few weeks. I'm sure about that, Eddie.
Yeah, I agree with you. But what surprises me is nowadays we've got a whole political class of people who say the idea of a national sovereignty or a nation state as being any kind of vehicle for anything progressive. They seem to be against that. And it seems to me if you want to nationalise an industry, you sort of need a nation state to do it with. You can't have a national health service without a nation state with which to implement them kind of policies.
blindingly obvious, but blindingly brilliant, Eddie. The reality is there is a class of people who have so lost confidence in their own people's ability to govern themselves, to make the changes that are necessary in our country, that they have subcontracted the business to somebody else, far away, unaccountable, unelected, unremovable, and then they can enjoy the low-hanging fruit that brings. I was saying to my boys the other day as we walked around a very prosperous area of London, and one of them had a big EU flag outside. I said, well, they've probably got every reason to love the EU. After all, they're benefiting from the cheap wages of technicians, tradesmen, workers coming in from poorer parts of Europe at knockdown prices. They're probably taking their espresso macchiato in a very nice cafe from a barista who's working for the national minimum wage from one of the southern parts of Europe or one of the far eastern parts of the EU, and so on. And they probably have an au pair, and they probably like the visa-free travel without a hitch across European borders. But what about the workers? What about the workers whose wages have been undercut? What about the workers who've been thrown on the dole? What about the areas that depended on industries that have been allowed to atrophy and disappear and be fossilized under the 45 years that we've been in the EU? Did you expect these workers and their families to vote for the contemporaneous reality enjoyed by some but suffered by many? That's the truth of the matter, isn't it, Eddie?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'll just say one last thing and I'll leave you.
Go on.
And that is the strange thing we're seeing, where there's an awful lot of these politicians, including politicians in the Labour Party, who want to portray a vote of 17.4 million people as racist. And I think that's quite a myopic view to take of the majority of the people in this country. And if that's the view you take, we've already lost.
Eddie, there's a mate of mine, a fire brigade union official, a militant trade unionist called Paul Embry, whose wife is Indian, whose children are half Indian, who is as left as Lenin, who is being rubbished on social media every day by liberals calling him a racist. You couldn't make it up, Ed. Now, the last caller of the evening is the professor from Boreham Wood. I think one of the smartest professors in this entire university. It's Lisa, Professor. Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, George, it's so kind of you, and I hope never to disappoint.
Well, you don't. All the listeners love you, and they ask, when is she coming back? So
really?
This is yes, you're a very popular professor in this faculty.
Oh, well, I love all your callers. They're all brilliant, and they all do a great service to democracy and free speech.
What about Eddie just there? Such brilliance from Eddie. I don't even know him. I don't know where he's from, apart from he's in London. And look at the brilliance of the argument that he made. How could you have nationalisation if you don't have a nation? How can you have a national health service if you don't have a nation? Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, exactly. Over the years, I've heard all the people from the Brexit argument put forward the most beautifully eloquent, well thought out, extremely erudite and educated arguments, and I really haven't heard that from Remainers at all. But I actually phoned to say that it was incredibly upsetting to see Julian Assange, and if it wasn't for Russia Today, we wouldn't have had those images of him being manhandled. He's a vulnerable person. He's had no exercise, no sunlight, and I know that he suffers with his chest, and he had quite a lot of problem with asthma. So the way he was treated, it's appalling, and it's a disgrace the way he was handled out of there. But I'd just like to say to all the liberals out there, once upon a time, Julian Assange was the flavour of the month, and The Guardian, the New York Times, and many others had a massive big payday publishing his information. But it just goes to show that even if you are flavour of the month, if you go off script, they will throw you to the wolves, and all liberals should, use this as a cautionary tale. But I know they won't, because they can't see beyond their own noses. So the other thing that I wanted to say is, years ago, when Julian was first arrested, I know that I phoned other radio stations and I said that this isn't about Sweden, it isn't about rape, it's all an excuse to get him extradited to the United States. I was told in no uncertain terms that I was a conspiracy theorist, that this was baseless, and this was wholly denied across the media.
Exactly. We were making it up, Lisa, and now it's there. It's what the editor was saying earlier. It's now out in the open and crystal clear. This is not about Julian Assange's sex life. It never was about that. It was, if it had been, Sweden would have given an assurance that they would not have extradited him to the United States. This is about the deep state in the United States of America getting their hands on a man who exposed their crimes against humanity, their crime against Iraq, their crime against their own people in lying and deceiving them into war, bloodshed which has never ended and now cascaded across the whole of the planet. Professor Lisa is unfortunately our last caller, and my apologies to all those to whom we didn't get and all those message senders that we were unable to reach. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, in the same place, for the mother of all talk shows.